Hello and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we are going to talk about operator overloading in Python. This is interesting and quite important lecture, so make sure you pay full attention throughout this lecture. So Python operator works for built-in classes, but same operator behaves differently with a different types. What I really mean is, let me save this one and press F5 in order to open the shell. What if I say 2 addition with 4? You could get the answer, that is 6. This same operator, that is the plus operator, can be used for the different operation, that is to merge or concatenate the two strings. So let me say, when if I say hello, and that should be the string, so let me create this hello string, and when I concatenate with this world, then you could see the new string here which is saying the hello world. So the same operators here that was used for this addition can be used for the concatenation of these two string, or it can be also used to merge these two strings. So let me say this list, and if I just say 4 and 5 and 6, then if I just press enter, then you could see to merge the list we can use this same operator, which is basically the addition operator. So this features in a Python that allows same operator to have different meaning according to their context is called the operator overloading. That means you can use the same operators over here for the different context. So let's see now what happens when you use with the objects of a user defined class. So we have already studied about how to create the class and object. So now what if we use the same operator over here, but in the case of a user defined class? So let's consider the example. So let me open the script and let me create the class which would be our point class. So in this point class, the first method as always would be the initializer. So let me create this constructor over here, and let me say x should be o, which is default argument over here, and y should be o, which is the point, basically xy point of this point class. So let me assign this x and y to this class variable, and let me just assign for this y as in class variable, that should be for y. So now we have this class point. So now it's time to overload that the same operator that we did before in the case of merging or concatenation of the string, that was the addition operator in the case of this point. So let me save this one first and press F5 in order to run. Now let me just create P1, which is basically our point object, and if I say 2 and 3 in the case of this x and y, if I hit enter, and if I just make another object which would be P2, and it will be something like -1 and 2. So now what I'm really interested is to add this point. So in order to add this point, we normally make use of this P1 and P2, but just remember, it is a user defined class. It is not normal class, or it is not in something like you are adding a different data structure, but it is a different class attribute over here. It is same as saying you are just adding the different object of this user defined class. So when I just hit press, then you could see error over here saying type error, unsupported operand type for point and point. So we have now error, and we have same thing that is saying type error is raised since Python didn't know how to add these 2 point object together. So Python doesn't know about this, so it will just throw us an error that is normally the type error. However, we can just make use of something like operator overloading in order to make use of this addition operator in the case of this object oriented class, or in order to add this object of our class. So let's make use of that operator overloading. So let's get a notation about the special function first, and after that we'll say how this operator overloading can be performed using the special function. So let's get inside of the special function that is normally defined in the Python. So first of all, what is the special functions? So special function is the class function that begins with the double underscore. So if you wonder here, we have this double underscore after or before this init, which is here the initializer, then this is also our special function or a class function. So these are the special function in a Python, and this is because, well, these are not ordinary. This function like init we define here is one of them, and it gets called every time we create the new object of the class. So I have already said you that P1, when I just create this P1, which would be our point, and let me just give 3 and a 4, then the first method that is going to be invoked automatically is this method, so that this is our special method. And there are tons of special functions in a Python, and using these special functions in the Python we can make our class more compatible with built-in functions. So let's get back to our shell. Let me just press F5. Now let me just clear this console first. And now first of all, what you need to do is we'll make use of this object. So in this object I'll make use something that is a point, obviously 2 and 3. Now in order to make our class that is compatible with the built-in method, what you need to do is make use of the special function. So let me just first print this p1. Then you could see this is a main point object which is at this location. This did not print well, but if you define something like a string method, something like _str and __ method in our class, now we can control how this method or how this print should be just controlled. So let's add this string or a inbuilt function, which is basically our string inbuilt function or a special function inside this point class. So let me go back to here and let me just define that is a special inbuilt method which should be str method. So now let me just pass self here, which should be our default argument to any of the class. Now we can just say something that is return me from here, that is with formatting. So let me just say return first, and let me just format first. So that should be formatted like this, which should be O, which is basically referring to something. Let me say X for now. So let me just give a comma again. Let me say 1, and let me just close this parenthesis over here, and let me format it now with this format statement. So I'll just say, let me say it should be format, and now what you need to give is self.x and self.y. As this is the class variable, so that means you have to just give the self.x and self.y. You can't just give x and y over here because it is not this global scope. So x and y doesn't have the global scope. That means you just have to put this self-x and self-y. So now when I just save this code, and basically if you see here, this is the way to basically give this formatting. So if you do this, it works fine. And basically if you just put O and 1, that means you are referring to this element to this position, and the first element or the second element to this position. So if I just save this down and print this, then you could see, and let me just make the same statement over here, which was the statement that we previously curled in the case of that where we created the point and printed it over. So let me just say p1, which should be the point, which is obviously our object, and let me say 2 and 3. Now when I just say print and let me just give p1, then you could see 2 and 3 over here. So we have now formatted with this str inbuilt method. So it's better now. It is turned out that the same method is invoked when you use inbuilt function like str, and here we have made use of this format. So basically you can now make use something like, let me save this down again, and if I just say something that is str method should be called within this p1, which is our object, then you could see that is, so let me say p1 is not defined. So first of all you have to define p1, which is obviously the object, and let me say 2 and 3, and after this let me just say str, which should be typecasted, that is basically p1 should be typecasted, and it is saying 2 and 3. And in the case of format 2, let me say format, and let me say p1, which is the same object, which is also 2, 3. And basically when you just print that p1, you could see the same, that is the point object is this position. That means when the formatting this with basically using this str inbuilt method, you are just returning or invoking one of the use of the inbuilt function like str or a format. So when you're doing something like, let me say, let me create a one more point over here. So if you are just doing this, that is str, and just passing this p1 to it, so Python is normally doing something like p1 dot and giving you this double that is underscore, and str and double underscore. So this is same as saying 2 and 3. So this one is same, and instead here we have made use of this special functions of the Python in order to format or in order to provide the namespace. So now let's talk about the operator overloading using this special function. So in order to add, we have to make use of this add method, which is also an special functions of a Python. So basically, in order to add or in order to overload this plus operator, let me show you a plus operator again. So in order to just add this object, which is basically our p1 and p2, we have to now overload with this special overloading special inbuilt function, which is add method. So we'll make use of this add special method in the class. Now let's add this add method, which is basically inbuilt special functions in our Python class. So let's get back into this code, and now here what you need to do is add another special function, and let me add something like a add in order to support this operator overloading. So I'll just say self and I'll say other, because we need another point in order to add. So this another is for another point. So let me just define this now. So we should define this something like x should be assigned is x first, and it should be other dot x, and next would be our y. It should be same as here, but instead of x we should have y. So let's just say y, and we'll just return that is in the form of point, and that should contain x and y. So we'll just return this. So when I just say something that is this method is called, so here what you do is basically you give this init method as in something like a point. Let me say 2 and 3. So if it is 2 and 3, that is a point that is given to this init method while calling p1. So let me say 2 and 3 is p1. So this is p1, and in this other basically you put p2. So let me say p2 is something like, let me say 1 and 3, and what you did here was self.x means you are referring to this 2. So you are just saying add me 2 and other x, that means you are just adding x of this other, that means 1. So I'm just saying 2 plus 1, and in this self.y you are referencing to this point p1 3, which is basically y, and in this other.y you are referencing to this 3, which is of this p2. So we are just saying 3 plus 3, and the output should be here 3 comma 6. So it is done using this add inbuilt method, which is our special function that supports the operator overloading, which is plus operator, in order to add different class user defined objects here. So let's run this code. First save it down, and let me say F5. Now first of all what you need to do is create the two object over here. So first one would be 2 and 3, and let me create next object, and next object would be obviously -1 and 2. So let me just print this down now. That is just adding this p1 and p2, which is basically our object of this point. So when I just run this, then you could see 1 comma 5, which is the addition of this object, which is p1 and p2, which in this case are the object of this user defined method. So operator overloading of this plus, basically this plus operator overloading is performed by using this special add method, which contains this other vector or other point as an argument, and basically you add over here, that is x component to x and y component to y, and you return in the form of point, that is x and y. So while doing this add method, what was happened here is basically you have just done something like p1 plus p2 in this adding. So Python will just say something that is p1 dot, and this add method is called over here with your p2. So it is same as saying this, and which in turn is something like point, and let me say point plus, and it should be add, and it should have something like p1 and p2. So these were the two that was interpreted by the Python. This was basically converted, or when you say something like p1 and p2, then it should be converted to p1, and you just call this add, which is special inbuilt method, with this p2 in order to add these two user defined object. Or you can also make use of this in order to add, which is done internally by the Python parser. So let's take a look to other special function that needs to be implemented using the operator overloading. So let's go back over here and let's see what are the special functions like this add function, str function, in order to overload any other operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication. And let's see that now. As you see here, we have multiple special function in order to overload multiple operators. So I have already said you about the addition, that is using this add special method, and we have something that is str in order to handle with the string expressions. So we have a subtraction that is done by this sub for the subtraction. We have a multiplication that is done by this mul, which is a special function which is done internally, and basically we have expression over here. And we need a power in order to do that. We have a pow method, which is basically a special function to do this division. We have a true div. We have floor division in order to give the floor division. We have mod in order to internally mode or provide the mode of the two user defined object. We have the L shift for the bitwise left shift and R shift for the bitwise R shift. And I hope you are now able to just check all of these operator overloading using this internally this method that should be implemented in the class in order to support the overloading of this operator. So you can now overload using the same concept for the subtraction and multiplication, so that you can get good idea for the division and floor division, which is really important concept in the case of operator overloading, which necessarily provides the implementation of this addition or these operators or some other operations to be performed with the case of the object oriented programming using the object. And basically this is an important topic, so make sure you get a good grasp on every bit of code here. So that will be the wrap for this lecture. See you in the next one.